migrations done right. We're going to be talking through about experiences that myself and the fellow panelists here have had when we migrated systems to the cloud, some of the gotchas and some advice that we've picked up and lessons we've learned over time. So hopefully you're looking forward to this. I know I am. Just a little bit of logistics first. I mean, my name is John Martin. I'm the Technology Partner and Alliances Manager here at Redgate. I've been doing data platform stuff for probably best part of 20 years now. Started with Microsoft Stack, and then basically grew from there. I've used platforms like Snowflake, Redshift, um, Aurora across both. Well, I've used AWS and Azure sort of extensively over the years as well. And with that, I was sort of going to introduce you to the panelists. We've got Natalia, if you want to give us a short introduction to yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you're located. My name is Natalia Birch, and I'm actually a manager at Database Migration Accelerated team at Amazon Web Services. So what my team does, we help our customers to move from the commercial databases like Oracle and SQL Server to open source databases like MySQL, Postgres. And I'm actually located in London, have been with AWS for about 5 years, just over 5 years. And before actually joining AWS, I was a lead and a senior database DBA, real database administrator for e-commerce companies, where I pretty much touch different really database technology like Oracle, SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, so pretty much everything. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Mike, do you want to give us a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Mead, and I'm Chief Product and Technology Officer at the Scale Factory. We're headquartered in the UK and are an AWS consultancy services partner specializing in things like cloud migrations and cloud security. I joined the Scale Factory back in 2014, so over 11 years ago now, getting hands-on, migrating customers to the cloud and so forth. But these days, I'm largely hands-off and oversee our service portfolio.
Awesome, thank you. And finally, Matt, do you want to give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Sure thing. Yeah, so title is there. I work for Apps. So Apps Associates is Microsoft partner, Amazon partner, Oracle partner as well. I've been doing data work, let's just say 20 plus years, consulting the last 10, and kind of a primary focus of that has been cloud migrations, large and small. Maybe a single app, maybe a single box, maybe 100, maybe 1,000. So yeah, I've been a part of some that have gone really well, and some that haven't, and I'd like to think I know why that is. So looking forward to sharing that and talking through all that the next hour.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Thank you very much, everyone. I mean, as you can see, we've got Matt by his accent. You can guess he's not sat in the UK.
Correct.
So it'd be interesting to hear from everyone else's that's on the session. Stick in the chat, have a chat with yourself. Questions wise, there's a Q&A. Please pop everything in there. We'll come around to it. I mean, we're going to speak about various topics, so pop your questions in. We'll either take them through the course of the webinar, or we'll sort of got dedicated time towards the back end of them. So couple of quick things. I mean, just a little bit about Redgate for those of you that may not be familiar with us as an organization. We've been around for 25 years and historically predominantly in the Microsoft space. More recently, in the sort of last 3-4 years, we've really expanded that to cover Oracle, Postgres, MySQL as well within the portfolio. So whether it's observability with the Monitor solution, database schema deployments with Flyway, or you're looking to sort of do better governance around securing data in non-production with TDM, or any of the sort of traditional sort of developer productivities around Toolbelt, all worth having a look at there. And again, there's sort of multiple database platforms supported across all of those now. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides and we can concentrate on the valuable information that our speakers are going to be sort of giving us. And I mean, the first thing, coming to yourself, Natalia, first, I think, I mean, when we start thinking about strategy and planning, that, in my view, is one of the most important parts. If you get that wrong, everything kind of goes a bit sideways from there on out. And I mean, AWS have got a fantastic framework with the 7 R's for migration, which is something that I've used extensively over the years myself. I was just wondering if you could sort of give some insight around potentially which of the 7 R's that you see most commonly adopted and why by your customers when they're taking workloads from on-premises to the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something we heavily actually using as well. Something 7 R's we're using to decide what is the best migration path for a specific application, right? So when customer comes and they need help with the migration strategy, we assess every single database and application for that potentially 7R. And what we've seen, which one is the most use is depending on the customer. So if the customer comes really early in the process of their migration strategy, right? So they just started migration, right? They're perhaps not familiar with cloud. They want to learn a bit more. They're not really comfortable yet to do like full path migrations. So we're seeing they're going more towards the like rehost as one of the R's, rehost, right? Rehost strategy is something you basically take from your on-premise database. You just lift and shift to the cloud environment, right? And use cases for it as well. Sometimes customers just need a quick data center exit, right? Like will come up to us and saying, we have a data center exit by the end of the year. We need to move as soon as possible, right? So for those customers, it's really probably the best way to go is to actually do rehost, right? We just don't have time to do refactoring in this case, right? So here customer can actually take advantage of the cloud, of the infrastructure as well, so at automation as well. So there is some benefits already in that sense. And then we also have customers who perhaps want to have some more time and they want to take advantage of the cloud services. And we've seen a lot of customers actually go to replatform. So replatform is something when customers going away from, let's say, Oracle on-premise to RDS for Oracle. So sometimes I actually can argue that perhaps it's actually a faster migration than to EC2, because what you need to do really being familiar with the RDS and take an expert and import. But it all depends as well, like, depending on the skills of the customers, right? So that's sometimes rehost probably better than actually replatform. And for customers who already been on AWS, and we've seen a few customers, returning customers, right? They're already familiar with EC2s, they're already familiar how to manage the infrastructure on cloud environments. So those customers seeing more now towards going refactoring. And I guess I'm a bit biased because I manage the team who does refactoring. So I've seen a lot more refactoring than other teams as well. So that's pattern we've seen for returning customers. If they've been for a couple of years on AWS, right, they want to take advantage of the managed services. They want to actually take advantage of the innovation on the fast deployment, development, right? They want to kind of go away from the licenses as well. So we're seeing customers who really want to kind of take advantage of open source. So those customers going to refactor as well. So again, it's really where the customers are on their migration journey. And I guess the best approach is to assess the workload, the application, right? The database, and what is the right path if the customers have this timeline for their migration journey.
Cool. I mean, Mike, is there anything you'd like to add to any of that?
Yeah, I think Natalia's covered pretty much everything there. I mean, the thing that I can add to that really is, you know, we see a similar thing. It depends on the sort of maturity in an organization, and I guess the reasons for moving as well. What is the business driver? Like rehost or, you know, lift and shift, you'll often see if there's a data center exit. So a lot of organizations will have a commitment with their hosting company for, let's say, a yearly contract, and that creates almost a deadline, right, of need to get out of the data center by X date, otherwise you're going to have to sign up to another year's fees. And so there might not be the time to do that refactoring or replatform, and it's just get stuff into the cloud and we can worry about that later.
No, that's cool. I mean, Matt, just thinking about obviously the area in which you're working these days. I mean, is there anything that you're seeing trends-wise around whether people are lifting and shifting, whether or not they're sort of doing that sort of replatforming or refactoring anywhere along the lines? What are you seeing sort of trends-wise?
I'm not sure I'm seeing a specific trend one way or the other. I think, you know, in kind of let's say the cloud data platform space,
Mhm.
you're starting to see more of things that are kind of attempting to be a one size fits all thing. Like
Mm.
Fabric, you've got relational databases, lake houses, warehouses, streaming data, all those sorts of things. Databricks,
Mm.
Snowflake, kind of right along there too. They're trying
Mm.
to meet everybody where they are. If there's a trend, it's probably that people, instead of saying I have a data center full of SQL Server
Mm.
boxes and I want those to live in the cloud somewhere, they're a little more
Cool.
open to what the future might be, and not
Mm.
just a lot of the migrations I've done, it generally started as a request
Mm.
for a lift and shift. Like, we're closing a
Okay.
data center, or we've been acquired, or we're acquiring this place and we just want to move all their stuff. Um, then we would get into like, what's the reason? What's the business problem or issue we're trying to address? Maybe lift and shift wasn't right, but it's like everybody started
Mm.
there. And I feel like now, those big cloud data providers, their marketing teams are well funded and very good at
Mm.
what they do. So
Yeah.
the question now is more, hey, I went to FabCon, I went to the Databricks conference, I'm
Mm.
interested in that. Can you tell me
Yeah.
more about that? Is that something we should look at? So I guess if there's a
Mm.
trend, it's that. It's looking
Cool.
into the future a little bit.
Nice. Cool. And those were all very interesting sort of contents and tidbits there. When one thing that sort of jumped out was when Dahlia said about the people starting with one thing and moving bits and pieces. I mean, one of the questions I see a lot of is, well, how do I get to the cloud with my entire estate? You've got data center exit. Obviously, you're going to have to move everything at once. But I mean, I've worked with some customers who sort of will trial it with non-production workloads, or we'll trial it with something else, and then we'll gain confidence and skills, and then move to the cloud. I mean, is that something that you see often as well, Matt or Mike? Is there anything?
Yeah, I'd say I used to see that more because
Mhm.
and I do still run into customers that will say, oh,
Mhm.
we're not sure about the cloud because
Mhm.
it's it it's insecure, or it's too
Yeah,
slow, or whatever kind of things that really aren't true
those sort of
anymore, but
old prejudices
maybe
that die
were
hard.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
um
cool.
yeah, so you'll get some of that, but
But
no,
people
I
seem to
think
be
it's
confident with it now.
yeah, I think
That's good.
there's much greater awareness that, like, this is just another
Mhm.
option for where we can house our stuff,
Mhm.
versus like, ooh, it's this thing I'm not sure about, and it's the
Yeah.
future thing. It's very much now, obviously, and even smaller customers, mom and pop shops, that
Mhm.
would have been reluctant in the past, they realized that that's an option for
That's cool. So, I mean, we've been asking obviously the panelists some questions. Now I've got a question for the audience. I'm going to open up a quick poll. Very interested just to understand where you are in your cloud journeys, whether or not you've started to make that journey, whether you're already there. So feel free to sort of do that. I'll end the poll in a sort of 5-10 minutes time, and we'll see where we are with those whilst we move on to the next question for the team. So, Mike, thinking about the organizations that are taking work platforms to the cloud, work platforms to the cloud, what are the sort of KPIs that you think organizations should be tracking in order to sort of identify the success criteria of their cloud migration strategy? Where do you think they should be going, and what should they be looking at as part of that?
Good question. The way that I see it is largely broken down into, I guess, three categories. So one category would be business level requirements. I would say, like the drivers for moving to the cloud, by and large. So if it's for cost reduction, maybe it's for scalability, maybe it's to break into a new market,
Mm.
or whatever it might be. Capturing those business drivers and aligning KPIs with those so that you
Mhm.
can validate once the migration is underway and once it's complete that you have hit those, right? I think one that gets overlooked sometimes is total cost of ownership.
Okay.
A lot of organizations will, let's move it to the cloud and optimize it later. Definitely a strategy worth taking, but keep an eye on those costs so that those decisions are sort of made consciously rather than a big scramble when the CFO says, hang on, what's this big bill,
Mm.
right? So that's one that often gets overlooked
Mm.
until it becomes a problem. And then I guess the technical KPIs is the second grouping, and that's more things like, let's say, more workload specific metrics. So the performance of an application, the uptime of it, and so forth, so that you can measure a before and after. Like we've moved this workload from on-premise to the cloud, have hopefully, you see an increase in performance metric. So sort of tracking those more operational or technical metrics. And then the third thing is the health of the migration itself. And it's surprising how many organizations overlook this. How is it progressing? Like at the start of the migration, there probably would have been a timeline of which application is going to be moved when, and tracking the progress of that versus the plan. I think fundamental to the success of a migration, but also capturing learnings as you go. We moved this workload. We got a bit stuck in load testing because of this issue. Okay, cool. Let's learn from that and feed that back into what we're doing.
Cool, thank you. I mean, Natalia, given your area of expertise, and you see obviously a lot more refactors than some teams. I mean, where do you think there are important KPIs when you start taking into account that sort of refactoring of workloads and technologies into part of the migration strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say probably performance KPI as well. So we have customers saying, "Oh, we're running on Exadata, right? We have fast response. We have, all this no latency. We have all these beautiful features. Can you actually help us in Postgres with that?" So I don't think so. You can do, your team can do that. You can help us with that. So we're seeing obviously in terms of performance KPI quite important as well, and also what Mike mentioned as well in terms of companies now, more financial companies, we're seeing a trend coming actually ahead of time, looking at the TCO and saying we want to move away from Oracle database to Postgres. How much is going to cost us, right? So we're seeing more planning ahead of time now. So before it was like we're migrating now, like by costing us quite a lot. What can we do to optimize that? Now it's more probably 6 months ahead of time, a year ahead of time. Sometimes we see in a couple of years customers coming in doing entire database portfolio analysis, 1,000+ databases, looking how much would it cost us to run on RDS, on Aurora, on Postgres, right? How much would it cost us, as Mike mentioned, like migration execution KPI, how much would it cost us to convert the databases, perhaps in the next 2 18 months, and how much would it cost us to run that as well? So we've seen a lot more planning.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, does that sort of chime with what you're seeing as well, or?
Well, I think going back to something Mike said, one thing I do want to underscore is I think what gets forgotten a lot is, at least in executives' minds, these projects happen as kind of a big bang. They don't see a lot of the nuts and bolts work, the planning, the testing, and all that. It's just, okay, we're on-prem and now we're in the cloud after somebody snaps their fingers or claps their hands. So those, because they don't see that, they don't understand that some of these KPIs are going to have a certain flow to them too. Like a thing a lot of customers forget, and I always try to point it out really before we've even started, is for many migrations, there is a period of time where you're going to run both places at almost full production horsepower. Like if you're doing heavy load testing or some sort of customer cutover and you're going like client by client or something like that, that gets forgotten a lot. And so some things that will be perceived as like a cost overrun is really just the cost of a project like this. On-prem costs X, cloud costs Y, but there's going to be this middle where you've got an X plus Y, or most X
the
plus
sort of
most
dual
of
run
Y,
scenario,
and that gets completely overlooked because it's not communicated up front. So it's a surprise and not a nice one. So I think understanding that KPIs like cost and a lot of these may shift over time as things move around, communicating that early and often, I think is a big help.
No, that's cool. Thank you. Cool.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, John, to add as well, I think very good point Matt brought up here as well. And I think a lot of customers as well do not share, not aware, and partners about actually credits that cloud providers can help them during those migrations. So if you have customers who are moving and running those two in parallel environments, obviously that's very costly, as Matt mentioned. So there are actually help from the cloud providers with those kind of expenditure, which is really, really good point you brought up, Matt. Yeah. And what I'm hearing as well from the co-panelists as well, so I think depending on the customers, like financial customers, which I work in, based on obviously smaller and larger and medium size customers, right? They have different approaches. Yeah, that's quite interesting to see as well.
No, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, like you say there, I mean, the funding programs that the cloud providers have to help offset things is something that commonly gets overlooked because people don't know that they exist and therefore don't look to ask them. And that's where working with additional partners when you're trying to do this as well, I think is worth looking at. So I mean, it's that sort of power of three of the provider, a partner, and the customer looking to achieve a successful outcome. So just a quick one for everyone in the audience. I'm going to be closing the poll in about 30 seconds time. So if you haven't answered it yet, please do so, and then we'll move on. But I mean, Matt, thinking about the migration sort of goals and overall strategy for organizations, I mean, do you see any challenges with your customers where they have to balance that sort of short-term objective of I've got to do a data center exit with their long-term strategy around cloud of, well, how do I get the most out of it? How do I implement things like FinOps and everything that goes with it? Because obviously, if you've got time pressures, you're going to be looking at how do I do this quickly? Not necessarily the cleanest way, in my experience. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. And like I said, I've been a part of a couple of those almost gun to your head, for whatever the financial reason was. Like, all right, these two data centers here have to get to Azure. We don't care where in Azure, we don't care what services, but you've got 8 months. That kind of a thing. And if you say, well, we can't do it in 8 months, you got to do it in 8 months.
Yeah.
Certainly been a part of those, and I think probably most of us here have been around tech long enough to know that whenever somebody says, "Oh, we'll come back and fix that later," that doesn't happen most of the time
Yeah.
without a good plan and strong leadership and follow up to make sure that happens. So that's it kind of comes back to communication for me, and I've been around a couple projects where the cloud migration happened under duress, let's say,
Okay.
and then there wasn't enough communication up front to say you're going to be overpaying because of the speed at which we did this. We had to go to a platform that was maybe easier to move to, more comfortable for DBAs and devs, but you're overpaying. You don't need all of that, but in the interest of time, we put it there. Your ultimate end game should be this. Well, if you don't decide on that strategy, not necessarily from the jump, but in the early to mid part of the project and communicate that well, the perception is going to be that the project failed, that it's too expensive, even if things are working fine, that it just costs too much. So I think establishing whatever, it all comes back to the business problem or issue you're trying to solve, and then working back from there. And if there is if there's a beachhead in the cloud that you need to get to in time, but there's a long-term plan, it requires kind of follow through from all levels and strong leadership to make that happen. Because unfortunately, in my experience, absent that, it just doesn't.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I mean, Mike, is that sort of the same sort of thing that you see as well?
Yeah, pretty much. I think with Matt and Talia and I've already talked about the sort of trade-off between the different ways that you can get stuff into the cloud, the different methodologies, and exactly the same thing I see, like because of a deadline, whenever that might be, a lift and shift happens, and then people forget to do that replatforming project to optimize things. I think one where I've seen the most success is where organizations have adopted a continuous improvement mindset. So rather than take an approach of let's lift and shift, get this out of the data center into the cloud, and then do a second project that's more of an optimization or modernization, actually get into the mindset of continuous improvement, of saying, okay, what we're going to do is maybe every year or every couple of years, we're going to have a look and see what we're running in the cloud, see what services are available, see what new machine types there are, and just look at where improvements can be made and sort of look at the ROI on a case-by-case basis of
Mm.
saying, okay, we can make these platform improvements. That's going to save us 20% off our spend.
Yeah.
We're going to upgrade these machines. That's going to save us this money and get us more performance. So rather than just get it into the cloud and optimize it, actually just continuously do that.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, we've had a question come in, Natalia. I think probably good for yourself to answer this one. I mean, if you had to give one piece of advice to ensure migrations deliver longer term value, not just short term wins, I mean, what would that be?
I think, we normally when we step in as well, and I
Mm.
completely agree with Martin and Mike as well. So we're seeing those customers coming back to us saying we did lift and shift, but it's costing us a lot, right? Is the, cost pitfall really because they were rushing, they didn't really do optimization. What they did, they just copied the environment from on-premise to a cloud environment. And what we're
Mm.
doing for those customers is really, let's just start. It doesn't take too long to do assessment, right? If you have portfolio or large
Mm.
database estate, let's just do and kind of give them perspective for the future. That's how long it would take. Some of the databases might take 18 months. You don't have time for it to migrate. But
Mm.
some of the data, it might be straightforward migration as well. It's really this planning and doing assessment early in the process when you're just starting your journey.
Mm.
Really kind of give you what's my long-term strategy, right? So if
Yeah.
it's something, long-term strategy will take a long time, 3 to 5 years, like what can we actually do first to gain the most of the value, right? Can we do this? If that, as we mentioned before, what's the requirements, right? If the pain point is the scale or perhaps hardware replacement, right? Can we address that? And from the short-term goal, we can address it straight away and get the benefit of the cloud, right? From that point of
Mm.
view.
No, that's cool. Thank you. When another question come in from Sam, which I think is an interesting one, Mike, I'd like to pose to yourself is, Sam said that sort of a year or so ago, reading that there's been a sort of return to on-premises after moving to the cloud for whatever reasons. I mean, when I was reading a lot of those articles, people were citing again cost as a control there. I mean, is that something that you've seen, or are you seeing that people have now realised that simply doing a lift and shift is not the way to do it? Like you say, kind of that continuous improvement, continuous sort of optimization. Um, are you seeing people stay in the cloud, move and stay, or are you still seeing people consider coming back where they're not doing that optimization cycle?
So, I mean, it's probably a bit of a bias here, but we're not seeing a lot of this at all,
Mm.
really. I think there are a few interesting case studies of people having done
Mm.
this that have had a high profile, but there are far
Mm.
more organizations moving to the cloud than away from the cloud. And I think what often
Mm.
gets lost really is what these cloud platforms give you really, and it's enterprise grade infrastructure. So I think it's very difficult to compare like for like. So for example, if you
Mm.
migrate a workload to AWS and you run in an AWS region, you're running hot across 3 data centers, right? With enterprise grade networking equipment. You don't have to worry about an individual network switch or something failing that is going to bring everything down, or relying on one generator to power that. And so I think a lot of organizations that do move, it's usually a fairly static workload that's not really changing or evolving to the data center, and they're making significant savings. What you'll probably find is they don't have the resiliency that they had in the cloud. They almost certainly couldn't survive a data center outage, and they probably don't run with a global presence. Some of the organizations we work with run across 10 AWS regions. It's just not feasible to manage either open 10 of your own data centers or to manage 10 different vendor relationships. I think these are interesting use cases for very specific organizations with static workloads. I don't see it as a strategy.
No, that's cool.
And I think just a quick one as
Please
well
go
to
ahead.
add that, if somebody is struggling with the cost and they feel like their costs are quite high, do reach out. Obviously, I can speak about AWS as well. Do reach out to your account managers as well. An account manager can put you in contact with the architects as well, who actually can review as well your cost. So there are some strategy for cost reduction. You can have reserve instances. You can, use environments, dev environments only when you need them, and shutting down them for weekends as well. So there's some strategy which can help with those costs. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something that I've worked with customers on and been on the receiving end of work with cloud providers on, is looking at how can we optimize the way we're working once we're there. And like you say, that ability to just turn things off in the cloud very easily that you may not have had on premises traditionally is a really good strategy. Moving on now to sort of thinking about the actual the execution of migrations. Matt, for start with yourself on this one. I mean, from a tooling or services perspective, I mean, is there any that you consider was sort of essential for sort of moving to the cloud? And also, I mean, are there any that sort of maybe a little bit overhyped or promise a bit more than they can actually deliver in your experience?
Um, I, I've not. So I would say for the platforms and cloud providers that say they have migration assistance tooling, I've not had a bad experience.
Mm.
Amazon, Azure, whatever. Like, generally if you say you have tools, those are good. If the migration is here, run these 20 scripts, that can be a bit painful, especially if the team you're working with isn't comfortable with that.
Mm.
I think though the really overlooked tool, like all that stuff, in my experience, especially now, has worked pretty well. As these projects are much more common, the tools have matured right along with that. What gets overlooked a lot is the need, and hopefully you have performance monitoring on-prem. So we'll kind of start with that assumption, but the need for that to carry over to the cloud, and my strong preference there is that the same tool does both. You don't, because you want to be comparing apples to apples, not apples to anything else. And if you're using a different tool in the cloud than you are on-prem, that can be a challenge because maybe it's not reporting information exactly the right way. There can be subtle differences that may be meaningful. But if you've got the same cloud looking, or the same tool that looks down here as up here, then that's all equivalent data points.
Yeah.
So I always like that. I feel like that's an important part of those early discussions is like,
Yeah.
what are we using to monitor? What are we using to set the performance baselines we have? Because we at least in theory have to meet those. It's pretty rare that I've been a part of a project where they're like, listen, to cut costs, it's okay if we move to the cloud and everything goes slower. Sometimes that happens, and it's a business call. But generally, they want equivalent performance after the move, and so that conversation has to start with like, well, how do we know how we're performing now? What do we do to do that? And then hopefully, like I said, my strong advice is always let's use that same tool and make sure, because I'm a data person, make sure we're getting the database level information that we need, which is where some of those larger like enterprise monitoring tools struggle. They just kind of have the thing. They're like, yeah, the database is doing this, but we really need to get our hands dirty in there to see what it's doing.
So really sort of look at understanding the what's going on within the workload itself, not just that it's
Exactly.
I can talk to it as an endpoint.
It's green or it's red. Yeah. We need to know how it's actually functioning in there because we all know a lot of times that performance, it's not exactly linear. Like you can kind of tell when it's starting to hit the limit of what it's capable of, and then it often doesn't creep over the limit. It flies off the edge. So we need to know that that's coming before it happens.
No, it makes sense. I mean, Natalia, again, for yourself from a tooling perspective, like focusing back in on your experiences with the sort of refactor piece. I know that there's a lot of people that have made that sort of transition from one database engine to another. And what sort of tools do you use with your customers to help them with that sort of move from one to another technology wise? I mean, helping to make it happen quicker or what have you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the key really for successful migration is start with the good planning and assessment, right? So there might be sometimes those databases which perhaps really complex to migrate, or perhaps the timeline which will take a couple of years not visible, right, for the customers to do that. And starting with this planning and assessment is really important for that. So we normally recommend to run schema conversion tool or schema conversion service, recently been introduced as well to our customers. It does what it does is really look at your current database, look really deep inside, look what other objects, how much automatically converted, how much manually converted, what is the effort required to do those conversions. So, and kind of from that assessment report, you can make a judgment, right? You can, you know what, we can do that, right? We have number of people, we have skills in place to do those conversions. And what a lot of people actually underestimate amount of time required to do the testing, right? And Matt mentioned those monitoring tools important, right? So when you do your testing, you monitor, right? So if we take, let's say, 100% our migration journey, so we would say about 40% is database and data migration, right? Database conversion and data migration. But quarter of, about 30% we allocate actually for testing. Make sure that you're actually testing your application against your new database engine. So very, very important. And also other tools, so obviously tools like database migration service, which takes the data from your source database to your target database. So that's very important as well. And a lot of strategies as well, how you can use DMS, we call it DMS, data migration service. So how you can customize if you have large databases. And a lot of people actually asking us, oh, we have a terabyte of database, the size quite large, so we probably can't convert. It's way too much to do. And we always say it's not the size of the database, it's actually number of objects. So if you have just a couple of tables there, right, not a lot of logic in the database, that's actually straightforward migration, right? The size doesn't matter because database migration service will take care of that.
Cool. I mean, Mike, you're obviously working with the Scale Factory there, doing this type of thing on a very regular basis. I mean, without giving obviously too much away, but what are the sort of tips and tricks you have for successfully migrating your customers to the cloud from a tooling perspective to make your life easier?
Yeah, good question. I think Matt and Natalia have covered a lot already. So I might end up covering some of the same ground, but with AWS, the sort of services that are provided in the platform are pretty good. So database migration service, application migration service, and so forth. I think DMS, database migration service, is probably the one that we lean on the most, because moving data is the riskiest part, really. Like often in a migration, you'll replicate the application somehow, whatever that might be. You might use a tool to capture a virtual machine and run that on EC2, or maybe do a re-platform or whatever. But the application you will have running ahead of time to start doing some testing and validating that it's functioning, and then at some point you'll want to cut the data across, and that is the most risky operation. So we use DMS to replicate the data and do schema conversions if you're transitioning to a different database, as Natalia mentioned, and then really it's down to the cutover. But doing that, having the testing in place and just really validating that it's working, doing a dry run, and just pretending you've cut over the data, right? So and then do some internal testing on the cloud, the application running in the cloud, to make sure it works is key. Because I mean, the other tip I'll give is have a rollback plan. So have a test plan and have a rollback plan just in case something goes wrong. Because as soon as you do flip the switch and make the cutover, you are now creating data, right, in your database in the cloud. And so if you decide, actually something is wrong and we need to roll back now, you need to reconcile that. And so having a plan for all of these kind of cases is key.
No, that's awesome. I mean, that some of the things you said there, I mean, leading neatly onto the sort of next question, which is really sticking with you, Mike. I mean, how do you look at approaching minimizing the downtime and disruption during the migration phase? I mean, obviously you talked there about the cutover and everything like that. I mean, are there any sort of techniques or suggestions you have around how to minimize that duration that you're going to be offline?
Yeah. Okay. I love this question. I love this one because it reminds me of a conversation I have a lot. Right. Speak to an organization and they say, we would like to migrate to the cloud with zero downtime, no downtime at all. And you're like, okay, right. Let's have a look at the infrastructure and processes that are needed for that. And then they see the impact of that and the cost. And it's like, okay, maybe we can afford a little downtime. So I think that's the first thing, right? Understanding how much downtime is acceptable, and planning around that, making sure there's some contingency within that. So let's say 1 hour of downtime is okay. don't have it so that 59 minutes of the of that window is actually making the cutover. Leave some margin, and also having that acceptance plan of we have validated that we've flipped the switch, we've cut over traffic to the cloud version, it is working, we are happy, making sure that's in place. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen is an organization that didn't realize they had a fundamental issue with I think it was something to do with an index on a table, and it sort of got corrupted in the migration, and they didn't realize for a day, by which time they had been storing new records, and they couldn't really roll back. So they had to try and resolve that issue. And all of the poor DBAs and application developers, sweat pouring off their forehead, and working around the clock to get it done. So having a really good test plan to just make sure when you've done that cutover, everything is functioning.
So I mean, Natalia, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, absolutely as well. I think I absolutely agree. I think planning and assessment early in the process as well. The key is who is using the application, what's writing, any bad jobs writing. And, I'm seeing a lot actually of the time when perhaps people not realizing that who is using, and then jobs will try to connect to your database. So really, really good assessment there before you start. And another issue I'm seeing as well, that customers do try to do tests. They do it in some sort of pre-prod environment, but it's not the same environment as the production, right? And down the line, when they're doing production migration, right, they're realizing, we're running out of time, or is it slow, or something happening, right? So it's really, really important to have this stage migration where you're doing your migration testing on a copy of your production environment. You're taking snapshots or you're taking a copy of it, but make sure you have the same amount of data there, right? So something when you're doing copy, you don't run out of this your downtime window. So very important from that point of view.
Oh, that's cool. Matt, I saw you nodding away there, and it comes back to, I guess, what you said as well about that sort of dual run and acceptance criteria. I mean, is there any sort of thoughts that you have around the best way to sort of do that acceptance criteria? This has been successful, and we haven't got a problem on our hands.
I mean, I think it really does come down to those two things that were just mentioned. Like, you need to be working on a close facsimile of the prod environment, as close as you can get to, while honoring data privacy concerns and all that, and documenting and practicing the processes that are going to get you there. Like, it's boring stuff, but there's not an easy button for that. It's the way that I like to talk about it is, if you've been given the proper kind of size of team and the proper environments and all that, the actual migration itself should just be a muscle memory thing. Like, you've done it several times in practice with that data. Maybe it wasn't that server, but it's one just like it. So by the time you get to the main event, it's a non-event. That's always been my goal. But that can be a struggle to convince managers and executives and people like that of the investment that they need to put in there, that in their mind is hidden. They don't see any of that happen at all. They're usually not that hands-on. It's like, okay, well, this part of the project plan, like, are you going to show me anything? No.
Nope.
we're going to be practicing, so our conversation after the main event is really short. It's just, it worked, we're fine.
I mean, coming back to what you said there about doing that sort of practicing and prep, I mean, we've emphasized the importance of proper planning and testing and evaluating and redoing these things. I mean, my experience has been, the more testing you do up front, it makes the change control when you submit it for doing it for live downside easier when you've got a big pile of evidence to back it up, because that way the cab has got a lot of trust in what you're doing. They can see that you're providing that data to them and say, yeah, we had this misstep and we corrected it this way. We had this issue, we corrected it this way. These were successes, and this is a success criteria. And going to the sort of change board with that sort of information and that detail and say, yeah, we can do this, we've practiced it many times, makes them a lot more confident. Just sort of boom, right, make it happen. So that's cool. So obviously we've spoken about migrating the actual migration. I mean, then it comes on to operating in the cloud, and this is always an interesting one for me over my career. I mean, I started off working with cloud over a decade ago now, and one of the things that I've learned over those years is that operating data systems and just systems in general in the cloud takes a very different mindset to running it on premises. Um, I mean, what are the I mean, Matt, I'll start with yourself. I mean, what's the sort of biggest difference you think between managing a cloud workload versus an on-premises workload?
You likely have different tools to manage
Okay.
those, and the infrastructure you're operating on is different. You know, there's a I could think of some examples from the SQL Server world where I've gone to a client and said, you know, okay,
Mm,
you want to lift and shift from VMs you have on-prem now to VMs in the cloud. You know, the storage that underlies the VMs in the cloud is different than what you've got here. So there's some different things we might do in terms of number of volumes, sizing, things like that
mhm,
to get the performance out of the storage that we want. And you know, I can think of a conversation I had with a particular client who I will not name here,
mm,
and they were just steadfastly against changing what they had always done. Um, and that was the reason. Well, we've always done it this way. It's like, well, in the cloud,
mm,
we need to do this a different way for you to get equivalent performance to what you have. And you know, we went into the physical reasons why that was, and they just wouldn't change. So I
yeah,
guess my advice would be, don't be that client. You know, if you've brought a partner in, or you have experienced cloud people on your team already and they're leading this effort, if they say, listen, there are some processes, some configurations, whatever, that we need to revisit because there's different, better ways to do it in the cloud, listen to them. You know,
mm,
the line I always like to use is, if you're paying somebody for their knowledge, believe them.
yeah,
um, you're paying them good money, and yeah, it's okay to kind of go back and forth and argue about standards and things like that, but in the end, if there are people on the team that bring that experience, and they're telling you that in your cloud of choice, on your service of choice, things are different and you have to make changes to what you've done, do that.
mm, mm. I mean, Natalia, is that something that you see when you're dealing with the customers in your world when you're taking them to the cloud?
Yeah, I guess the infrastructure, right? Infrastructure management.
Mm,
On premise, we own the infrastructure, right? We're responsible, we buy,
mm,
we provision, we install, we patching, right? So in the cloud is a completely different mentality, right? You just the end user of the service, right? You only take what you need, right? And we've seen, as Matt mentioned, customers, that's what we need, right? We're growing, the database growing, we need X amount of space for the next 3 years, we need that number of CPU, we need powerful machine to be able to handle our application. But you only take this from the cloud mentality, you only provision what you need, right? And normally it's 20,
mm,
40% what we have on premise, right? And uh, and we've seen people struggling with that, right? They're worried, well, what if we have a spike in CPU or in memory or something, we run something? You kind of like, that's the main difference, right?
mm,
Different mentality, right? Only use what you need. And if you need more, you scale, you have the serverless, there are options, right? You need it, you use it when you need it, right? I guess
mm,
that's one of the, yeah, we often seen as well, just to kind of, yeah, add on Matt as well. And then also the cost as well, very different how you manage cost on your premise and how you manage cost on the cloud, right? And from the cost point of view, right, before we just doing all sort of planning for the next 3 5 years, as I mentioned, in the cost, in the cloud is different, right? And
yeah,
understanding and making team to understand, right? Do you really need that Oracle database to create that feature, perhaps adding some sort of tick box or a slider in your application which will have only five tables? Perhaps do you really need this database, Oracle database, with the licenses, right? So use when you need something, right? But
mm,
take in consideration the cost on the cloud, right? Before we just, well, we have Oracle licenses, we just create the database. From in the cloud, think what actually the value you're adding by using that service, right? Take in
mm,
consideration cost. And I would probably advise as well for customers and to kind of be more transparent, right? Make your end users know how much would it cost in the cloud, right? Just to kind of increasing the hardware or instance size, right? What does it cost you, right? Do you really need
Yeah.
to use, as I mentioned, that database, right? Or perhaps you just normal, dynamo table will help, it wouldn't cost so as much, right? So a bit more transparent about cost. So that's significant infrastructure, and the cost probably the most important difference between managing the
Yeah.
on-prem and the cloud.
So I mean, that cost visibility becomes a lot easier, obviously, because you've got the access to all the billing information and such like in the cloud platforms. I mean, Mike, that needs the raise the sort of really the spectre of FinOps. It's something that's really coming to the fore now. It is because someone's stuck an ops suffix on the end of finance. So it's something that we should be looking to pay attention to. But I mean, is there anything that you've got recommendations wise around how teams can look at leveraging some of the cloud capabilities to really sort of bring that financial management into the operational sort of side of things for actually running the platform, which the technical staff would do on a day-to-day basis, but the finances obviously historically held out with procurement or what have you, bringing that closer to the team. Have you got any sort of thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think it's one of these things where if you get it right, it can be a really powerful tool and an advantage in an organization. So we have to remember. I mean, Natalia kind of touched on it from a different angle, but there's a shift from in the data center. You might buy some hardware. It has a 3-year lifespan with its warranty. Maybe that's, I don't know, a big cluster, right? A big compute cluster that all these virtual machines run on. And, IT, all that hardware is a cost center. And a lot of organizations don't really have a good way of slicing and dicing where that's used, right? So there's this big cluster. It runs all these virtual machines. Maybe there is some kind of loose, all of the finance department's apps takes around half the cluster. So it's quite a crude sort of allocation of cost, right? From the infrastructure that's running in the data center to those bits of the organization. I mean, how do you slice the cost of a switch, right? A fiber control plane for the SAN or something. It's really difficult to do, but in the cloud it's possible. So you can annotate resources with tags, and then you can put together cost attribution categories and then report on that. So you can see to the tiniest degree what is being spent where, and not even just this is a cost to the finance department and this is a cost to the marketing team, but by application. So how much are we spending per department, per application in the department, production versus test environment versus a staging environment versus sandbox, and really drill down to the detail. And I mean, all of the the cloud platforms have the reporting and data available, but FinOps is really about making the best use of that data and treating it like a data project, getting it into your tooling like Power BI or whatever, and starting to look for patterns, especially if you've got a workload that auto scales, that isn't static. How much is it costing to run on, let's say it's an e-commerce platform, Black Friday versus at the sort of quietest time in the week on an ordinary day. And then the finance department's got that data and they can look at it and do cost modeling and cloud, forecasting and so forth. But also the technical teams arm them with the same data because there could be cost optimization to be had. Maybe that workload is, there is a static element to it and you can take out a reservation and save 60%. Or maybe the machine type could be upgraded and you save 20% or something. So the data is there that you wouldn't have before. And FinOps is just about making the best use of that and feeding it into tools that the finance team, the technical team, and everybody can make use of.
It's really about sharing that information out. I mean, Matt, is there anything you want to add to any of that? I mean, are you seeing benefits to bringing sort of cost control to your customers?
Certainly. I mean, the cloud does generally have much better tools for us to tell that story. We get a lot more detail. I think the trick there, though, is properly explaining that to the powers that be, because it's a wealth of information, but it can be too much for certain types and titles. So I don't think we should overlook the need to maybe kind of shape the cost story a bit before it goes out. My customers where you had somebody in accounting or finance or something like that has direct access to Azure, AWS, whatever, it can just go look at that stuff raw. Tends to lead to a lot of confusion because they may not understand the way a particular service is built. Maybe compute and storage are built separately. And I can think of a couple customers that opted for services like that, and then finance is yelling at them saying, we're being double billed for this. Well, you're not. It's billed in a different way. So certainly not hiding anything, but kind of shaping that story a bit saves the people that are hands-on a lot of hassle.
Yes, I mean, one of the things I've seen in discussions about is, like you say, there is, well, I'm paying for this VM, I'm paying that much, but I'm also paying for the storage on the VM, so am I being double billed? And it's like, well, no, because you just need to roll all of those up, plus the other costs that may be coming associated with it. Say, we've got some network egress and various other bits and pieces and storage transactions. So that composite of costs all needs to sort of roll up and be shown effectively, I think. So, getting to the last stretch, got a quick poll for everyone on the call again. It's really about which cloud vendor of choice it is. We'll leave that open until the last bit before we'll move into the last section of the questions now. So, the poll is open. You've got 5 minutes or so, and we'll go from there. But obviously, we're running in the cloud. Governance, which is everybody's least favorite topic, although it might be strange in that it's one of my favorites. Governance is something that, in my experience, has to span the full life cycle of a migration. Knowing where you were, what you did to arrive at where you are now in a sort of cohesive way, so that you can provide confidence not only to the business, but also to your customers. But then also when you start doing retrospectives about how do we do the next migration better. I mean, Natalia, you obviously work with a lot of organizations in your role at AWS. I mean, is there anything that you can sort of provide sort of advice-wise on how to sort of embed that sort of good governance into the full life cycle of a migration, and then into your cloud journey from when you're up and running?
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely agree. That should be really from the early stages of migration. And really key here is kind of using automation and enforcing that, right, through the kind of control enforcement. So when you just start in your journey, you're creating those automation templates. Could be CloudFormation, could be Terraform, or any other automation tools. Kind of invest in those automation, right? Make it right, so you can create a database in the right VPC, in the right subnet, right? You look at the correct security groups, you're using the correct parameters, right? So make sure it's done really early in the process, right? Identified what are the, who's the owner of that database, right? What is the, like, as I mentioned, parameters as well. So when those databases created, right, is addressed early in the process, not later on, perhaps, wrong security groups open, right? Be a bit more proactive, right? Implement from the day one, create this automation around, right? So there are a lot of tools as well to kind of pick up that any concerns, any issue come up, so you can use the like monitoring and alerting. So if something open to the public, right, or ports, so that's can be notified to you, or if you install perhaps old version, or like require patching as well, or somebody access who shouldn't be accessed. So there are a lot of tools as well, like on the cloud environment, which can help you with those monitoring as well. But the key really for me is implemented from the day one to make sure that is in place, before even you get to those issues.
Mike, is there anything you want to sort of provide insight-wise from that perspective as well with the projects that you've worked on?
Yeah, I mean, these days, 100%, I'm going to say, of migration projects will start with a landing zone, which is a concept that I think cuts across most cloud providers, most of the major cloud providers anyway. And it's essentially how you configure the cloud for your cloud hosting. So a lot of the security guardrails and controls and governance is wrapped up in that concept of a landing zone. So within AWS, there's AWS Control Tower, which could be used to deploy a landing zone, and that will turn on security controls and then enforce those as well, given the sort of approach of providing environments with guardrails so that developers and engineers can work within those environments and have the freedom to innovate, because this is the trick, really. You don't want to lock down the cloud environment too much and then nobody has access to it, and there is no innovation, there is no agility, and you don't get the benefits of the cloud. But allow people the freedom to test services and try stuff out and build new stuff. But there are guardrails and there's controls and there's auditability of what is happening. I mean, the one thing, my favorite AWS service by far, and maybe I'm unusual in this, is CloudTrail. It provides you an audit log of every single thing that's happened, which you don't get in the data center, right? You don't have an audit log of this person plugged this network cable into a switch unless you do that manually. But in the cloud, you can see that. And so through that, you can then track what everybody is doing. And then give them the freedom, but have visibility of it.
Awesome. Cool. So just one last thing before we round out. We've got one question that came in earlier from Sam. And so, Natalia, I think you're the best person to quickly answer this one. Has there been much of an increase in the move to open source databases over the past few years, especially for the cloud? Sort of more or less moves to open source than on premises in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, I think 3-4 years ago, we were seeing a lot of free platform, a lot of free hosts as well. So we have a pandemic and people were trying quickly get to the cloud. So now, obviously, those customers being on the cloud for a couple of years, more familiar, right? They want to get away from the licenses. And there is a big actually demand go to open source, right? So, and it could be Postgres. So we're seeing a lot of Oracle SQL Server to go into Postgres. Sometimes we're seeing customers going from SQL Server to MySQL as well. So, and also we've seen as well, like actually a lot of customers already have Postgres environment, MySQL environments, and they're moving them to the cloud as well. So we've seen a lot going away from the commercial databases to open source. And that's, I guess, the reason why my team was created, to help customers to do that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate it. I mean, the insight shared by our panelists has been really useful, I think. Feel free to reach out, and if you've got any more questions, you know where we all are. But thank you once again to everybody who's here attended, and thanks once again to all the panelists. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.